Larry, thanks so much for being a part of our video series, Closing the Distance, Second Pres Stories from a Pandemic. For those who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Larry Sloan, and I've been a member at Second since about 1982. I actually grew up in Indianapolis and moved to Louisville in 1969, I think. I remember unpacking our stuff when we moved and watching the first lunar landing. And so it was whatever that was. It was in 1969. So I joined Second, was the first church that I ever belonged to. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I had a neighbor playmate who went to the Tabernacle Presbyterian Church there. And he invited me to go with him to Sunday school. We were probably about 11 or 12. And that's a great Gothic looking church with lots of secret passageways all over the place. So we would explore things and so forth, but I still have a Bible from there. I read the Bible in high school as literature. I was kind of agnostic, but as I got older, when I turned 40 and had gone through a divorce, I was thinking that something was missing in my life, and it was spiritual. So I went to several churches in the neighborhood. I lived very close to Second Presbyterian Church at that time, and talked to the pastor, Glenn Doris, and decided that I wanted to join, and I was accepted. I had been baptized as a child in a congregational church that my grandmother went to in Chicago. So anyway, I belonged to the church for a while and traveled a lot in my job. I was a traveling salesman. I sold craft supplies all over. So I really wasn't in town much during the week. And my stepchildren went to youth programs at Second Pres. We went to Sunday service, but it wasn't something I was very involved in until I didn't travel quite as much. And then I became more involved in it. What got me involved was I started going to men's Bible study probably about 15 years ago, and became very interested in the studies and made friends there. And then one of the gentlemen who was in that was on the search committee, I guess, or whatever the nominating committee, I guess, and nominated me to go on session. So I was on session in the late 2000s, I guess, and then again just recently. So I've been active. I've been on a lot of different committees. People kid me about that all the time, and I've liked all the committees I've been on. Worship, I've been a head usher for a number of years, but the committee I really like is the mission committee. And it was kind of funny when we paid off the mortgage on the church. I decided, well, the mission committee is going to be where the action is in this church, and I thought it would be interesting to be on it. And so I've been on it probably about 5 years. But the mission committee, it was kind of stuck in a certain rut. There was a certain amount of money that the church allocated to mission every year, and it just seemed to be staying like that. So when I became the moderator of the mission committee, we tried to talk about increasing what we would ask the church to put into the mission. And of course, it's an interesting problem in a church because you've got people that donate to these various missions in our church that we support independently of the church. So they are supporting these missions with their own money. So a lot of them are on boards of these various missions we support, but they also give their stewardship dollars or donations to the church, and a percentage of that is given to these missions. So it's kind of like if you're asking somebody to increase their stewardship and give more money for the mission part of that stewardship dollar that they're giving, well, they're already giving to the Cabbage Patch, or they're giving to United Crescent Hill Ministries, or many of the other missions that we support. But anyway, this COVID-19 hit very hard. we realized it was going to really hurt our mission partners. The first ones we really heard about were Bellwood and Brooklawn, which are separate but equal partners in their mission enterprises. And they, because school was canceled, were suffering a financial burden that had not been planned for. And so we got together in April and decided that the church, it would be good if the church had an emergency fund for these mission partners. And we've been amazed at the wonderful response that the church has made. The congregation has donated somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000, which is pretty terrific, to the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund, but they have not cut back on their stewardship. Stewardship is on target. So that shows the generous spirit of the church. Plus then the session has actually allocated additional funds in the amount of somewhere around 75,000 so far. We asked for 100,000. We're hoping that they'll give us the remainder of that, which we've used, and it's been very, very appreciated and very helpful to our mission partners. And there are probably about 7 or 8 mission partners that really needed the money that we have donated money to out of that fund. So that's a very rewarding thing that we've done. The mission committee is made up of a lot of people. I think we have something like 12 or 14 people on it. And they're all very dedicated people. They're very interested in trying to follow Christ's word. And this has reinforced my own faith. Just seeing the other people in that committee and how dedicated they are to trying to help. We decided last fall there's a project that the Presbyterian Church has called the Matthew 25 project, and that's I was naked and you clothed me. I was thirsty and you gave me water. I was hungry and you fed me. That part out of Matthew 25 is the key to solving a lot of the world's problems. And so we have really been working on that as to how we can make our church a Matthew 25 church. That's our goal. We think Matthew 25 is a great thing, and it fits into the civil unrest that we're seeing right now, because part of it is the structural racism that is a part of our society. And it's a part of our society. We just have to say, we have to own up to the fact that it's a part of our society, and we need to just see what we can do. We can't probably get rid of the racist structure of things like our own church, which is mostly white, but we can do things that can educate ourselves about it and maybe try to change things down the road. So that's a long answer to your short question.
It was really good, though, and you were doing some good evangelism for the mission committee, too. I like it.
Yeah,
so you
and
started
if anybody watching this wants to join our committee, we're glad to have you.
Exactly, yes. If this doesn't get people pumped about joining the committee, I don't know what could. You kind of sort of started to hit on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how this pandemic has influenced your own faith.
Well, my faith has slowly evolved over my life. I started out in a home where we actually read the Bible, but we did not belong to a church. And I had a little neighbor friend who went to the Presbyterian Church, which was half a block from my house, where we used to play softball and all that sort of thing. And he invited me to go to Sunday school with him. I think we were about 11 or 12, Tommy Miller. And we went to this very beautiful old Gothic stone church. And he kind of knew his way around all the little secret passageways and so forth. And I went to Sunday school there. I don't know what I learned. I was only 11 or 12, but I still have a Bible that they gave me. So I must have been in a Sunday school class. and I would read this James version of the Bible, authorized King James version, as I became a teenager and became interested in literature. And one of my favorite books of the Bible at that time was Ecclesiastes. There's so many book titles that are taken from Ecclesiastes, like Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises and so forth. So I read it as literature, but I wasn't sure about a belief in God. I was pretty much an agnostic as a young person. And when I became older, I began to feel like maybe there was something missing in my life. And I started to look around at churches. I had gone through a divorce, and I settled on Second Presbyterian, talked to the pastor, who's a gentleman named Glenn Doris. And I had been baptized as a child in a congregational church that my grandmother belonged to. So I joined the church by proclamation of faith at that time. But to me at that time, going to church was going to the Sunday service. And maybe my kids went to Sunday school, or we all went to church together. My stepchildren were involved in the youth group. But when I really got involved in church was when I used to travel all the time. So I wasn't able to participate in a lot of things. I was an usher at that early stage of the game, which was a good way to meet people. But then I got into committee work. I guess men's Bible study was where I first really got interested in it. And I just walked into men's Bible study one Friday morning at 7:00 because I was kind of interested in learning more about the Bible. And there were a lot of people in that class, a lot of men in that class. And eventually, after 2 or 3 years in there, one of them was on the nominating committee and talked to me about being on the session. So I got on the session, and I was on the worship committee, and then I was on other committees, fellowship and so forth. So everybody has kidded me about being on every committee that there is, but I have not been on every single committee.
Not yet.
Not yet, anyway. But when we paid off the mortgage, I thought, well, mission is going to be something we can really do more of. And I got on the mission committee, and I think it sort of disappointed me that the mission committee always had the same amount of money to spend every year. I felt like, well, maybe we need to up it a little bit every year. And finally, about a year or two ago, we started to do that. The COVID-19 came along, and it really changed things. We started up this special fund that I think I've already spoken about. And but the mission committee has deepened my faith as much as anything. This COVID-19 has deepened my faith further and made me realize how lucky I am. I don't have to worry about losing my job. I'm retired. But there are so many people out there who've lost their jobs, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who maybe have no insurance now. They have nothing. And it's really up to us to see if we can help. And while it's a huge problem and we can't solve it, every little bit we do helps. That's the way I look at it. So I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I have one more, if I could ask you one more question, which is just to say a little bit more about how this pandemic has impacted your day-to-day life, and maybe something that, as we're hopefully soon going to be moving out of the pandemic, something that you want to carry with you that you've learned from this experience.
Well, I can't remember if I already said this or not, but there was a book I read in our book club at church about maybe less than a year ago called A Gentleman in Moscow. And that was, I can't remember the author's name, but it's a beautifully written book. And it's about this count who in the communist revolution sided with the communists. So he wasn't executed after they won the revolution, but he was allowed to live in the Metropole Hotel. And he lived in all of his property was gone because the state took it, but they let him live in a very beautiful suite for about 2 years. And then they decided that wasn't right. So they stuck him up in the attic in a little tiny room, and he lived there. He found some secret passageways up there, just sort of like that church I went to. And he wound up living a comfortable life. But his whole mantra was that a person must adjust to his circumstances. There's sayings in other cultures, like in the Japanese. There's a Japanese saying, "Happy is the man who can adjust to his circumstances," and that's also in Augustus Caesar's book on meditations. It's a Stoic philosophy, but if you can adjust to your circumstances, but it's also in our Bible. How do you adjust to your circumstances? How do you accept what you don't feel like accepting? And it is really a path to being at peace with yourself if you can adjust. Maybe you've lost a lot of money on the stock market, or maybe you've had a divorce, or maybe you've lost a loved one. How do you adjust to that? But adjusting to your circumstances is part of the part of the secret, I think, to living a life that is productive and not destructive. My dad, I always say this, my dad was always talking about how important flexibility was, but he was probably the least flexible person I ever knew. But he had the words, he just didn't walk the talk. So anyway, that's probably, I feel like I just turn my life over to the Lord, and I believe that things will come into my mind through the Holy Spirit and help me cope with the problems I have. So I guess that's how it's has deepened that idea of faith even more than I had before. So
yeah, that's really beautiful. Amen.
thank you.
I know that I'm really grateful for the ways that all of Second Pres has been responding to caring for our community, but especially for the ways that you have been a part of propelling us to think more critically and creatively about how we're called to be Christ's church in the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that.
I think that I think there are many that can, I'm one of many voices that can express that gratitude for you.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. But I got to tell you, I've got some great people in the church who are not all of them are on my committee either, or I say my committee, the mission committee, but there's so many people in our church who are great examples of Christian living that I'm feeling very blessed to have gotten to know.
Yeah. Amen. Well, thank you so much, Larry, for participating in this video series. And I know I can speak for a lot of people that when I say that I hope we can see each other face to face again soon.
I hope we can too, but we're going to be really careful about all that.
Yes, we will. Yes.
Yeah, I went to get some Graeters Ice Cream the other night. I'm sure you've discovered Graeters Ice Cream.
Oh, yes. Oh,
yeah. And so there's one very close to us on Bardstown Road, and I went over there with my mask and my gloves and everything, and I got my ice cream and came out of there. And diagonally across the corner, there is a famous spot, Dundee Tavern, and it was out. They were outside, but it was packed with people with no masks, shoulder to shoulder, and gosh, it really concerned me. So we've got to be really careful. This thing ain't over yet.
No. I hope and pray that we all use the wisdom that God has given to us to care for each other during this time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll add one little note to that. I've been in this Bible study, for 15 years, and we've read everything in the Bible 2 or 3 times during that course of time that I've been in it and studied it. But we're studying the epistles of Paul, and we read Galatians about a month ago. And there is something in there that I know I've read before, but it really stuck with me this time. And that is in Galatians 6, verse 2, Paul says to bear one another's burdens, and it's Christ's law. You're following Christ's law if you bear one another's burdens. And I think that's something to keep in mind during this pandemic.
Yeah, well said. Well, thanks again, Larry. And
Thank you so much, Teresa.
yeah, appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. We appreciate
Thanks.
you. Thank you.